Today's session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube if you would like to view it afterwards or share it with some friends or colleagues. Um, we will pause at several times during the presentation for you to raise your hand or to ask a question. You can do that either in the chat or by verbally. I think the group size is such that we can accommodate the verbal questions today as well. It's a great pleasure to introduce Mr. Curt Johnson, who's president of Save the Sound. Save the Sound is a local organization. Well, he's very local. He lives in Brantford. It's headquartered, Save the Sound is headquartered in New Haven, and it has several very ambitious missions to preserve the environment, to preserve the cleanliness and purity of the sound, and to be a steward of the water and the land and the air in our community along the shoreline. So, Curt Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today, and you can take it from here.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. Really appreciate being here. I'm going to show a few slides, and I think I'll start off doing that now. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So let me get this on the slideshow side of it. Can people see this okay? Thumbs up. Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking today a bit about collective action for an ecological and human resilience in our region. And I am going to talk particularly about collective action because I think it's become in my lifetime a bit of a weaker muscle for the society in general, and many times we have forgotten about the power that bringing people together can have. My contention is that while private action to improve the environment, to fight climate change, to clean up our waterways, etc., is valuable, no question about it. It's really when we join together in a larger body we do that. So today, I'm going to be doing three things. One is talking a bit about collective action. I'm going to be asking you to participate in the following way. I'm going to be sharing some of the collective action that Save the Sound is doing and inviting you to, and asking you to sort of put on your doubter's hat, a bit of a questioning, and prod me a bit about whether the things I'm talking about are real, are doable, or seem to you to be more idealistic than practical. I think we try at Save the Sound to really think about actions that will make a difference for our environment. And finally, I'll talk about one aspect of personal action which many of you are thinking about in terms of fighting climate change. I'll just talk about a tiny little sliver that maybe we haven't thought so much about, which is tied to some of our regional energy changes that are happening in a positive way in our area, and then open it up for questions. So I am going to pause after several of the slides and really invite you just to ask questions and raise questions and raise doubts, and I welcome that. So one of the big areas of focus for Save the Sound is our ecological restoration team. We have a team of now soon to be 9 professionals working in Connecticut and New York. And when you start talking to groups about their ideas and what they're trying to accomplish, I would really recommend to you that you also ask another question, which is, what have you actually accomplished in the last decade or so? What have you done? How has the world been different or made different because of your actions? So this is just a little bit about what that team has accomplished. And when I list these items, it means we have taken on leadership of a project to make this change happen. We've been the project administrator and coordinator. We work with engineers, we work with consultants, we have engineers on staff. So that's basically it. So in short, we've done a fair amount in the last 15 years or so. We've opened up a lot of river miles by dam removal and through fishways. We've taken down 5 dams over the uh, last 15 years or so. Restored a lot of degraded marshland, uh, replanted along riverbanks a lot of native vegetation. And when it comes to rain gardens, which is a concept of beautiful, slightly depressed, lowered garden areas that can absorb stormwater from streets or parking lots and get it back down into the ground where it won't flood neighbors and it will no longer pollute Long Island Sound or its rivers. We've actually been in charge of either siting or directly installing 138 as of January 1. We've got a couple more under our belt this spring. That in total is treating now about 13.5 million gallons of stormwater each year. Stormwater that otherwise would be flooding areas and otherwise would be polluting the sound. And we've completed 4 watershed plans, which has spun off a lot of this work. And annually, on average, we've had about 1,800 volunteers working with us to remove about 6 tons of trash from the coastline. We can't possibly do this work just by ourselves. We've had hundreds of volunteers, many great engineering groups, partners with cities and towns, partners with other nonprofits, but we have led this activity. So I'll just pause there. If there's any questions, put on your dubious hat and go ahead and ask away if you have any questions or comments. Anything that we're seeing, Dan, or should I move on?
It seems to be an unusually shy group today.
Okay.
How,
I have a question. Wait a second.
Sure.
oh, there we go.
I know,
All right.
right? Can you say a little bit
Why don't
more
you
about
introduce yourself, please, before you ask the question?
Oh, sorry. I'm Sarah Sorensen. I'm a Brantford resident. And I'm curious to hear more about the dam removal and what
Sure.
that means and what,
Right.
if any, negative impacts that has on our community. Thanks.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, Sarah. Great to see you, and thank you for helping to invite me here today. So, Dan, we have literally hundreds and hundreds of dams up and down our rivers in Connecticut. Most of them were built in the early industrial time, and I mean from 1750 till, let's say, mid 1800s typically. And they were built as water power dams for the most part, no longer useful and no longer used, and they're blocking fish. So we have a legacy here on Long Island Sound and in our rivers that even a generation or two ago, the rivers would turn black with river herring just this time of year, literally March, April, and into early May. And those fish have to move from saltwater up into the freshwater to lay their eggs. And literally, just about every animal we can imagine that we like eats those creatures sometime during, so whether it's an osprey, whether it's a whale that occasionally are now coming into Long Island Sound again, whether it's a heron in the fall eating the young of the year that are swimming back down those streams. So taking down the dams is the best way to reconnect those river highways, and can actually be very beneficial from a flood prevention point of view. And I'll give you one great example. We took down the Pond Lily Pond Dam in New Haven up off of Whaley Avenue at the old Pond Lily Motel, if anybody knows where I'm talking about. Anyway, long story short, that dam was raising the water level, and as a result, it was flooding upstream a bit. When we took the dam down, which was completely rotten, by the way, and was in danger of being washed out, when we took it out, we did two things. One is we dropped the water elevation about 2 or 3 feet to a couple of subdivisions that were being regularly flooded, number one. And number two, we prevented Westville from, at some point in the future, due to this neglected dam, coming down during a huge flood. If that had happened, it would have sent about 7 feet of mud and debris down into Westville and flooded out literally and threatened literally thousands of people. So that's the answer from a perspective of both flood prevention in some of our dams and also from a point of view of reopening our fish highways to life here in Long Island Sound. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have a couple in chat now. Pam asks, how do I get a rain garden?
Great question. Thank you, Pam, for that question. That is a fantastic question. So if you go to Yukon Clear and type in rain garden, University of Connecticut, CLEAR, we helped Yukon put together a fabulous do-it-yourself rain garden guide. And it covers everything from how to site, how large to build it, where to build it on your property. It actually has a vegetation guide to all the native type vegetation, which would be applicable, and it shows you the way in which to construct the rain garden itself. So very thorough. Just go to University of Connecticut CLEAR and type in rain garden, and it will give you a complete guide.
Thank you. We have another question. John asked, walking around town, you can see some of the storm drains have signs that say, quote, this storm drains to the sound, unquote. How can we get this on all of the storm drains to remind folks not to pour pollutants into the drains?
So if you could, Dan, maybe that individual could put his email in the chat, and I am happy to respond. So there's two things that you can do. I'm hoping this summer, by the end of this summer, we will Save the Sound have literally several thousand decals that people can use. That's for 2 to 3 months from now. But if I receive that email, I can send out the what's called the watershed group of DEEP, our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, also has decals that you can put on the drains itself. So let me see if I can hook you up with that. And Dan, what I can do is on Monday, see if we can get that information to you, and perhaps you can send it out to the group. Would that be okay?
Sure, that's perfect.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just
we'll
need to
send
get the
out,
individual up there. And like I say, hopefully in 3 or 4 months, we will have those materials ourselves at Save the Sound. It's a great
yeah,
volunteer activity.
yeah, one related question. I hear you, you rely on volunteers, but you haven't told us how we can actually do that. What's the best way to contact the organization or to get involved?
Yep.
Find out about different projects.
So the calendar is an excellent way, and also, I would recommend the calendar, particularly for our coastal cleanups. Our coastal cleanups will really ramp up starting in July, August, and our biggest period of time for that activity is in September, anywhere from the second week in September to the second week in October. It's our International Coastal Cleanup activity, and there will be, 40 to 50 opportunities listed on our calendar under savethesound.org. So that's the easiest thing. If you're particularly interested in the decal effort, be sure to I will. Well, I'll just share my email right now. It's cjohnson, JOHNSON, at savethesound.org. So
Great. And we can include a series of links to useful resources when we send out the announcement of how to find this on YouTube afterwards. So we'll be in touch.
great.
Let's pause here for a moment with the questions, and Curt, why don't you continue, and we'll come back to the questions at a later
Sure.
point.
Sure. Yeah. So when we talk about regional action, I just wanted to give you a sense of where Save the Sound works. It's all of Connecticut, and then it is the coastal stretches of Westchester County. We have relationships certainly in the Bronx, in Queens, and the entire North Shore of Long Island. These symbols are specific on the ground projects that we're involved with. They can be land protection battles that we are underway. They are particular bay and harbor pollution abatement projects we're involved with. They can be some energy related work we're doing, et cetera. So I just wanted to give you a sense of when we talk about regional environmental action, what we're talking about from a collective point of view and a community point of view. Our mission, probably not surprising to you, Long Island Sound and its rivers and lakes safe for swimming and fishing and use, clean air to breathe, building a clean energy economy, and making Connecticut and New York leaders in slowing climate change. We're the folks who are on the front line of battling to save our last great forests, riverfronts, and coastal areas from development. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then we are always up in Hartford, particularly making sure that the laws that protect you and natural resources are particularly strong. I'll just give you one example on that. I can't help it. I'm a lawyer. I'm sorry, but we are unique. We in Michigan are one of two states that have a law called the Connecticut, and in that case, the Michigan Environmental Protection Act. And what it does is it gives you as citizens and us as Save the Sound, as a citizen group, the right to do what we call an intervention, to intervene as a party before a zoning commission, before a wetland commission on the administrative level, or in court, to really defend the natural resources, the public trust, interests in clean air, clean water, clean forests, etc. Very unusual law, but it gives you what is called standing to be there and to put on a case to protect a critical environmental concern. So I'm kind of assuming there's not any questions here. I'll kind of move on because I think the rest of it we'll get to some questions in just a few moments. But we are. I'm going to talk more about what we're going to be doing in the future as opposed to what we have done in the past. But feel free to question me and ask doubtful questions about what we have done as we move through the three elements of our 5-year strategic campaign, which is about protecting, restoring, and transforming our environment in that region with a lot of overlap around climate change. So protection to start with, we have identified 12,500 acres of land that is in danger, both here in Connecticut and New York. Out on New York, the middle slide that you see is Plum Island. Most of you know we've been battling there for a decade. We made some big progress. We are hopeful that within the next couple of years, we'll see our Department of Interior protecting that property. We've made tremendous gains in Congress in the last year or so. So a good opportunity there. There's a couple other big battles on Long Island that we are working on in Mattatuck and an area in Nassau County. Here in Connecticut, there's three major projects that we're working on right now. There's a proposal to develop the last wild mile of the Niantic River, and that is being proposed for a huge apartment complex and massive housing development. We're battling that in court and out of court as well. The one that you should really be aware of is in northern Connecticut near Colebrook. There is our last untapped public drinking water reservoir. In other words, this is a reservoir that exists that is not used currently for public drinking water, but could be in the future. It is a very large reservoir, and it is surrounded by about 9,500 of currently protected water company land. The owner of that dam and the reservoir is the Metropolitan District Commission, a huge quasi-public water company. And MDC is saying that they no longer need this resource for public water, which means if they were actually able to abandon the reservoir, what it would mean is that 9,500 acres would be available to go on the auction block. So that is a major, major focus. We simply can't, in this day and age, be tossing away the last huge untapped drinking water resource and a major forest system that connects with the Great Northern Forest here in New England. And finally, I'll talk just for a minute, and you'll hear a little more about it, about the 110 acres in southern Hampden. In stark contrast, this is right next to the historically black community of Newhall, Hampden. And we have been approached and asked to help out to establish this as a community park and nature preserve for that community and the surrounding neighborhoods in Hampden. So that's a major focus. Our protecting and defending our region's natural resources. We are up at the legislature. We're watchdogging, patrolling, testing in Long Island Sound. We'll talk about that a bit more. And then data, I'll just mention that you should be all aware of our Sound Health Explorer. If you just, in your Google search engine, type in Sound Health Explorer, there's a wide array of data there about both the ecological health of our bays and harbors, as well as information about every major, there's, I guess, 210 public beaches in the relative health, how healthy they are for swimming there. A lot of data that's extremely important for protection and moving things forward. Any questions about this before I move on? Jan, let me know.
There's one question, but it's not about this. So why don't you go ahead?
Okay, well, we'll get to it a bit later. Yeah, restoring. So we are actively right now in 10 bays and harbors around Long Island Sound, fighting sewage leaks. Basically, where we are at with sewage systems around Long Island Sound is that we've done a tremendous job, and Save the Sound was there advocating with many, many other groups, with the state of Connecticut, the state of New York, and we have upgraded our sewage treatment plants. We've done that over the last 30 years. It's a pretty big success. I can guarantee if we hadn't done it to cut down on nitrogen, that Long Island Sound would be pretty much dead now from New Haven down to New York City. It's made that big of a difference. But our sewage pipes that collect the sewage and send it to those sewage treatment plants are really in bad shape. So we're actively working in 10 bays and harbors and stretches, including New Haven, where we are hopefully close to settling a lawsuit that we filed against the Water Pollution Control Authority in New Haven. Probably many of you remember not last August, but the August before, there was a 2.5 million gallon raw sewage leak into the Mill River with our beaches here in Brantford closed down for several days. So we're close to getting a settlement there. We have recently gotten a settlement in Darien where they are actively now engineering their pipe system to improve it. We are working very actively in Bridgeport. We're pushing and really cajoling them, and they are moving ahead with a $250 million upgrade to both their sewage treatment plant, which is antiquated. It's one of the rare ones that is, as well as their collection system, which will make a tremendous difference down there. But we need to expand this effort over onto Long Island. Long Island has a different problem. Those bays and harbors have typically very old and dilapidated cesspools and septic systems very close to the water, which is causing major both bacteria problems, making it unsafe to swim there, as well as nitrogen loading into those bays and harbors. So we need to use the same methods that we're using here on the Connecticut coast and the Westchester coast, which is a combination of Bill Lucy up on top. He's our eyes and ears out on the water. We have probably 30 to 40 now watchdog individuals who are just keeping their noses out if they smell something or they see something, letting us know. Also, our data collection is identifying where we should be focusing. And, thanks to really some partner groups that took the lead, we now have a Sewage Right to Know Act that we now can go in and harvest the data to tell us where the sewage overflows are occurring most frequently. So that's where we focus our attention and focus our combination of community outreach. If we need it, we'll go to the press. And then if that doesn't work and a municipality refuses to do the necessary actions, we will file a lawsuit because we do have lawyers on board. So the second part of this is, a long-term 25-year effort to make our sound plastic free. We're actively looking at legal theories right now to pursue against the plastic industry that brings in so many bottles, etc., into our landscape. Just again, our volunteers are removing on average about 4 tons of plastic crap out of Long Island Sound. And the other element I'll just say is every time we install a rain garden or every time we install a bioswale, what that is doing is it's collecting that plastic at that location as opposed to sending it down those storm drains, which is the way most of this material you're seeing in the photo got out onto the Sound to begin with. And it then gets intercepted and removed and put into the into the waste stream as opposed to the Long Island Sound water body. So I'll pause there. I imagine people might have a question or two here.
Let's see. Bob asks, why is the Sybil Avenue Bridge replacement project stalled?
Oh boy, that's a great question. And I'll open that up to the group because I don't have, this is the civil, just repeat the location again.
Sybil, S-Y-B-I-L.
Yeah, I do know the location, and I don't know the answer to that. Does anyone, if anybody has an answer, they could type it in, perhaps, but I don't. I'm sorry. Don't know the answer to that.
So Ted Petrenko raised his hand. Do you want to unmute yourself, Ted, and ask your question,
you.
please?
Thank you very much for your talk. It sounds to me as if Connecticut has better laws and is more effective than the New York side. Is that true?
There's been all the sewage treatment plants have been upgraded around the sound. Now, there's one major problem in New York City I will mention. There's a huge plant in New York on the East River that did not get upgraded in terms of its nitrogen condition. And that's going to be a major focal point over the next 5 years for us to try to get that moving. But another probably 40 on Long Island and in Westchester, if you add them all up. And then in New York City, 4 were upgraded there. Well, I'm going to say more like probably 30 other sewage treatment plants have been upgraded. But the volume of sewage that comes out of New York City is so overwhelmingly huge just because of the population. And I'll add that their sewage collection pipes are similar to what we have in our old cities of Bridgeport and New Haven. It's a single pipe on the ground, underground, in the streets that collects both the water from the surface of the streets, that's storm water, as well as the sewer water from your toilets, okay, from all the toilets of the city. The problem with that kind of system is that when there's a huge rainstorm, say anywhere over an inch or so in New Haven or Bridgeport or New York City, the system is simply overwhelmed, and a combination of raw sewage and polluted stormwater goes out into the streams and harbors. When I mentioned Bridgeport, the upgrade that we have been advocating for and working with the city for, and I got to give the city credit, they have hired a new young professional engineer, a woman, who's taken over from, well, let's just say it's an occasionally inebriated, ineffective older gentleman. And she is really pushing the city forward. We are forcing her to have meetings once a year with her neighbors to explain what she's been doing. She's under a consent decree or a legal decree from the state of Connecticut to do the work, and we're making sure she does it. Anyway, long story short, in 7 years or so, when that project is complete, it will diminish the amount of these, what we call combined sewer overflows or combined stormwater and raw sewage overflows by at least 50%. So there are solutions that can happen, but they need money. And fortunately, our lawyers and Bill Lucy, our soundkeeper, have been working now for 15 years up in Hartford, convincing our state legislature each and every year to make state investments so that a city like Bridgeport, which has very little resources itself, can probably get the equivalent of about 60, 70 cents on the dollar of state grants to do this work, because otherwise it's unaffordable for the people of Bridgeport to do that kind of work.
May I follow up?
Sure.
Your organization, does it run by volunteers? And is there a lack of people in New York as compared to Connecticut?
Well, we are slower to being in New York. I'll start with that question. We opened up our Westchester office 8 years ago, will be 8 years ago in May, and have done a tremendous amount of work. The reason we opened an office down there, we have 8 professionals down there now. The reason we opened our water quality office really down there is that's where the biggest problem is, right? You have the biggest population. You have a very, very narrow East River, which is the avenue that, the Long Island eastern part of Long Island, western part of Long Island Sound, gets connected to the ocean compared to the Race on the other side. Little fun fact, and when you hear the term sound geographically, it's a estuary, in other words, a arm of the ocean that mixes with fresh water that's connected in 2 locations to the ocean, not just one. One is a bay, 2 is a sound. So we have, a very narrow connection on the New York City end with tremendous amounts of population. That's why we're focusing our work down here. Down there are on water quality. We also do work up here, obviously. I mentioned several of the locations. And here in Connecticut, we have, let's see, we have 9 down there. We have about 22 or 23 professionals here. They are ranged from what Bill Lucy is doing to a water quality monitoring group to a group of attorneys that work both on climate change up in Hartford, but also on water quality and land battles. And then we have also a team of about 8 folks who run the ecological restoration projects that I showed you. But we also work with volunteers. Our water quality monitoring, for instance, right now we are teamed up with 26 different groups. I want to give a little shout out for the Friends of the Farm River right here in Brantford, which is one of those volunteer groups that's doing water quality monitoring on the Farm River this summer and has been doing it for the past 3 years. That's a volunteer group. There's probably at any one time about 5 to 6 active monitors, 100% volunteer. I'd say of that group of 25 or 26 groups we're working with, probably I'd venture to say about 18 of them are entirely volunteer. And then there's some academic groups and actually an interstate federal group that works with us too. But again, we have 1,600 volunteers that work with us cleaning, pulling junk out of Long Island Sound every year. So it's a relatively small staff with a lot of partners out there. Yeah.
Thank
Other
you.
questions?
Yeah, there's a related question from Pam. Do we have a combined system for rainwater in Brantford?
We do not, fortunately. Ours is a separated system. And for the most part, we're doing okay, I'd say. The difficulty is that stormwater itself is actually very filthy. It can carry a very high bacteria load. So I'll give you an example. If you go to Sound Health Explorer, and my friend Sarah Sorensen's heard me say this about 5 different times. If you go to Sound Health Explorer and you zoom in on our Brantford beaches, the one that you'll see that generally fares the worst is our Clark Avenue beach, right in my neighborhood of Short Beach. And I'm convinced that a significant part of the reason is that we have actually three storm water outfalls. In other words, we have pipes that collect the storm water from Short Beach, send it under the street, and they dump out the outlet of the pipe. Each one of these 3 is within, say, 75 feet of that beach. So that's an awful lot of loading that comes into that location. And actually, we have a group of volunteers who are going to be doing sampling of those outfalls. The initial sampling I saw was not great. There's a lot of bacteria that comes out of that because if you think about the way our stormwater system is set up, it's designed to take sheet flow off of our street. So anytime a dog poops there or anytime someone throws their bag of dog poop down one of the storm drains, which unfortunately happens, or or there's say a cat that poops nearby, etc. All of that will be collected and run down those drains right out into Long Island Sound. So, okay, I think that's enough on that. Sorry.
So you don't have a dog potty training program to?
Well, that's something that actually I give the Short Beach Civic Association credit for. We put up some signage. We have labeled the storm sewers once. We need to do it again. And we need to be, one of the efforts that we're thinking about long term is where can we put some rain gardens in that neighborhood to intercept. And, you know, at one point, I give our first selectman some credit. He said, well, you know, if you get the data on the outfalls and what's coming out of those pipes, perhaps we can think about some stormwater filters for the water going into that system. But that's really the areas we should be focusing on first. What are the stormwater systems that come in very close to our swimming beaches that we know and we can tell by the data that swimming beaches is struggling, right? That's where to focus our cleanup effort first.
So one other source that you haven't mentioned yet of nitrogen is agricultural and
Yeah,
lawn fertilizer
yeah,
sources.
yeah.
How do you, what's the relative magnitude of the human waste, the runoff waste, and the agricultural fertilizer? Which one's the biggest? And I understand that the storm surge are large but intermittent problems, and probably the dog waste and the agricultural are more consistent. So
That's a
how do
great,
you, yeah, go ahead.
great question. Really smart question. So the answer is it depends a bit on the sub watershed, and we have some data systems now. The Nature Conservancy has put together a data system to identify the relative loading. We are working with a woman, great professor from UConn called Jamie Vaudry. She has identified the relative sources of pollution, nitrogen pollution coming into these subwatersheds. Um, and I have to confess to not having looked at that data very recently, but if people would like to send in to Dan the subwatershed they are most interested in, and the watersheds for our area are the Brantford River, you know, the Farm River, and then if you get into Guilford, the East River and the West River in Guilford. So if you just want to put in your chat to Dan where you're most interested in, if I get that question, I can send it over to Peter Lindroth, our Director of Water Quality, and he can probably get me some answers within the week, and I can let you know. So the answer here in Connecticut, just to give you a general sense, is that the loading from sewage is highest as you go west towards New York City. There are some pockets of intermittent small septic systems that were never sewered in there. As you move from Brantford heading east, increasingly it becomes a combination of septic loading and typically lawn loading. Lawns can be very big areas, even as far west as Westchester. For instance, the Mamaroneck River, that system has a lot of loading of nitrogen from turf because there's several very large golf courses up in that area, right? So my assumption is for instance, in the Pine Orchard area, you probably have some significant loading from the big golf course there. So anyway, it depends on the landscape is the answer.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions. One about the, well, there are a few here. One about the airport and one about Phragmites. I wonder
Yep.
whether you would like to continue your slide presentation and deal with those later, or you can
Well, I'll start with I'll get to Phragmites a little later. I'll start with the airport right now. I can just tell you that our focus and our biggest concern at Save the Sound is the expansion. How big is the expansion? Number one, we'd like to see in a full environmental impact statement, which we just asked the FAA and the Environmental Protection Agency to require a full environmental impact statement of the expansion. What we do know from what is being talked about in terms of the expansion, which we think is just phase one, by the way, there will be about 27 acres of direct wetland filling. When you take 27 acres of wetland in that location, which is a bowl, and you fill it, it is likely to have significant flooding impacts on the nearby neighborhood, because that wetland now, that 27 acres, is acting like a sponge. When you fill it and elevate it, all it means is that the rainwater that would hit now that developed area is rushing off. Instead of being absorbed, it's being pushed into another neighborhood. So that's the biggest focus. And the other concern we have is that the 27 acres only includes the expansion of the terminal as well as the runway. It does not, they're also talking about having to build a new taxiing area to each of the runway areas, which means widening the runways. So it could be substantially bigger than 27 acres. And our strongest, request, or a very strong request, is to the FAA and the Environmental Protection Agency, is when that environmental impact statement is done, it needs to be done for the entire project. Identify the entire project and evaluate it. Don't do it in segments, because that gives a false indication of environmental impact. Okay, I think
we have one more question
Okay.
on the stormwater. Aaron Good asks, does the new federal infrastructure bill contain funding specifically for upgrading stormwater and wastewater infrastructure? How do we ensure that additional federal infrastructure funding comes to Connecticut to support water quality in Long Island Sound?
Aaron, great to hear your question. It's a great question. The answer is yes. There is a relatively small amount of infrastructure dollars. It's 25 billion now. I can't remember. Honestly, I can't remember if it's 20 or 25 billion, but it's in that range, which is significant. But that has to be spread across 50 states. Your question is a very, very good one about how do we assure that, and the answer is, I think in Connecticut, when it comes to stormwater, that is a really important question, and it's something that groups like Save the Sound and you, Aaron, need to really push on, and everybody in this room, because, I think the stormwater improvements have been largely ignored, and there's not a great system for lining up those projects. So let's work on that together, number one. When it comes to improving and tightening up our sewer pipe system, which is what needs to happen the most in Connecticut, I would say we're in pretty good shape, because we do have a state system that's pretty robust, that is reaching out constantly to the municipalities to gather lists of infrastructure projects that need to be installed. Now, having said that, we are going to be upping our watchdog work, looking at the sewage overflows and pushing on the communities where there are problems, and insisting that we by hook or by crook, get the engineering analysis to make sure that we know what needs to be done, so that those projects can be well set up for the infrastructure dollars. So there you go.
Okay, so whoever asked the Phragmites question will have to be a little bit more patient.
Yeah.
And
All right.
why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, that's fine. And we'll get to Phragmites right here, as a matter of fact. It's not very long. So restore abundance of fish and wildlife, reopening those rivers. Our goal is to remove 5 dams in the next 5 years. We've actually got them laid out, and the middle picture is the Kinneytown Dam, which is on the Naugatuck River. Now, the Naugy, for any of you who have lived in Connecticut for even, the last 20 or 30 years, you know that the Naugatuck was a seriously beat on river. It just had tremendous amounts of industrial waste. It had all the sewage from Naugatuck, from Waterbury, flowing into it, and Rye, Ansonia, Seymour. It was really a mess. With the sewage treatment plants having been upgraded, number one, and a complete, well, not complete, but probably we've seen a 95% diminishment in industrial waste running into that river. We're now in a situation where if we could reopen this as a fish highway, it could become a tremendous regional, and I mean southern New England, asset for rebuilding fisheries. This dam is the last dam to be taken down on the Connecticut, on the Naugatuck River. If we were to take it down, it would not only open up 40 miles of the Naugatuck as a free-flowing river, but it would also open up, when you add all the tributaries that flow into the Naugatuck, a total of 300 miles of potential open stream and river, which would just be enormously impactful in terms of rebuilding populations of river herring, etc. The reason we've gotten as far as we have, and when I say as far as we have every mayor in the Naugatuck Valley actively pushing for taking down this dam. We have gotten our two U.S. senators, as well as Representative DeLauro and the entire delegation behind taking down this dam. The reason we've gotten this far is that I give Bill Lucy tremendous credit, as well as a local volunteer who was a crazy diver and fisherman, just started doing some diving down at the base of this river. The water quality is very good. The clarity is quite good. And he got photographs of thousands and thousands of fish swimming around there. Well, guess what? There's an old, at the very left-hand side, there's an old fishway, an old fish ladder, and DEEP has been keeping track of how many fish have gone up that ladder over the last 20 years. Well, what we were able to show DEEP and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and everybody in between is that while there's thousands of fish that we were able to quantify down at the base of this river, over the last 10 years, on average, there's been 12 fish all season long that have climbed that ladder. It is an unusable ladder. And we're at the point now where the hydropower company has pretty much concluded, we hope, that this is not a useful power plant. It has ceased to produce power in the last 10 years or so. And the cost of reinvestment is so great they'd never make the money back. So we hope we're close to the point where that power company will donate the land to a public company that will hold the property, or an NGO arrangement that will hold the site until we're able to take the dam down moving forward. So we're super excited about that. We got 4 more dams, one out on Long Island, 2 in Westchester, another one in Connecticut that we need to take down. We need to build 12 living shoreline projects. That's where we can talk a little bit about Phragmites. This view at the bottom is the view of the Great Rock Living Shoreline Project that we received now about $1 million in grants, including a earmark from the congressman out there. Was the only environmental earmark he went after because he was so impressed with this project. So basically, this is a rendering of what we hope it looks like when we're completed. Right now, almost all this marsh is gone, and much of the fringe marsh to the right is Phragmites. What we're going to be able to do is set the right elevation, put in these what we call oyster mounds, or big, they're basically big cement containers that can, or cement structures that can support live oysters. We're putting a ring of them a little higher in the marsh and then one way down low in the marsh to the left, which is going to help prevent the wave action from taking out the marsh once we get it elevated and replanted again. But again, we're going to be restoring, hopefully, native Spartina from a Phragmites degraded situation. So we need to have a dozen of these going on around Long Island Sound. We're not going to just do them all ourselves, save the sound. We're in the process of starting to train up groups as diverse as Audubon, National Audubon, to a group in Bridgeport called Bridgeport, oh God, I'm spacing out on the name. I want to say green space, but that's not quite right. Anyway, great group run by a brilliant Bridgeport native woman who, as a graduate from Princeton, and came back to Bridgeport and told us, you know, she wants that group to be doing this kind of work throughout Bridgeport, and we really hope we'll be able to work with her and her young high school kids to make that happen. So anyway, that's a lot about restoration. Happy to answer any questions here, or if I didn't get the Phragmites right or didn't answer it properly, let me know.
I wanted to ask the C. Reed question, because Dan and we went many years back to Vermont and
Brittany,
experienced.
come closer to the computer. It's very difficult to hear you.
Okay, Dan and we went to Vermont many years back and experienced a little village that planted the Phragmites as a detoxification for their sewage plant, and they had great success with only that plant. And I was so impressed about it that I wanted to ask you a question about that.
Yeah, so Phragmites is a little bit of a complicated story. So there's two kinds of Phragmites, right? There is actually a native Phragmites to Connecticut. There's not much of it around. Most of the frag you see, which is what are called common reed, the really tall stuff, is an invasive, and we'd like to keep that out of our marshes for as much as we can. Having said that, there are, you know, in certain situations where we are building artificial wetland systems, frag will come in and it will do some of the denitrification work that that our Spartina will do as well. So my basic answer is that if you have a marsh system, the best is to have native plants there. However, if that's not possible, it's better to have Phragmites than you know, a eroded shoreline that is in danger of falling apart. So, you know, it's sort of a little bit of a layered system, I would say. I don't know if that answers your question, but it might have a little bit. Any other questions, Dan, before we move on?
I think we're good.
All right, great. All right, so transforming, I'll just say that, you know, when we look at climate change, there's a couple of things that I think is worth noting. So I'm going to put on my environmental lawyer hat for a moment and give you a 15-second lecture on environmental law. So the way environmental law works in the United States is twofold. One is that the states were given enormous responsibility to administer through their state environmental agency the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, our hazardous waste laws. So it's actually the states that are taking the directive from the federal government and acting as its agent to enforce those laws and to pass those laws and to set up the structures. So a lot of times we forget that. Number two, what's really important to recognize is that the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act were broad, big laws but they did not set pollution limits, for instance, for sewage treatment plants. The way that that got set is through regulation, through the agency, not the legislature, but the agency establishing the rules. When an agency establishes enforceable rules, it's called a regulation. When Hartford or DC passes a law, it's called a statute. So regulations are extraordinarily important. We have passed really strong statutes in both states calling for major reductions in climate emissions and carbon emissions. They're great laws. In Connecticut, for instance, in the next 28 years, we have committed by statute to reduce our emissions, our carbon emissions, by 80% from what they were, say, 10, 15 years ago. Now, that's we could squabble that maybe it ought to be 100%, but 80% in 30 years is an enormous task. But the problem is that our legislature in Connecticut and New York have not given the authority to the agency, in other words, to the DEEP, or in New York, the DEC, to pass regulations to achieve that end goal. If we had not given the authority to our federal and state agencies to pass the regulations to achieve clean water goals, the Naugatuck River would still be turning green and red and orange. It would still have enormous industrial pollution to it. And, the city of Waterbury and the city of Naugatuck would still be sending out primary treated, almost raw sewage into it. The only way we're going to get there is to give authority, regulatory authority, to our DEEP and to our DEC to actually get us to these bold statutory goals. And in addition, I would argue, we need to pass the same kind of citizen enforcement provisions under the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act that we have that will allow groups like Save the Sound and other citizen groups to hold the states of New York and the states of Connecticut accountable. So that's, the goals we're looking for in the next year is really about authority and accountability up in Hartford and in Albany. So any questions on that? You're very kind. It's the first time I've given a lecture on environmental law where everybody didn't fall asleep. So thank you for staying awake during that time. Questions, comments?
We have probably another 10, 15 minutes to go.
All right. So this is actually, I think, our last transformative slide. So this photo is of one of our board members, Justin Farmer. He's used to be, now he's the second youngest member of the town of Hamden City Council or Town Council. Justin came to us about 2.5 years ago and said, there's a incredible set of ponds and woodland, 110 acres, right next to my community, which is, a historically Black and African Caribbean community of Newhall. And it's been fenced off for 30 years because it needs remediation. It's the old Olin powder farm. It's where Winchester Corporation used to bring junk and dump it there, industrial waste. And it started a cleanup about 25, 30 years ago. It stopped, and we really need Save the Sound's help to help clean it up and see what the community wants to do. Well, there's been a bunch of meetings, etc. So folks from Newhall who are working on this, as well as the surrounding neighborhoods, have said we really want this to become a nature park and nature preserve. We're actively working with the community and with DEP to force the Olin Corporation to move the remediation forward and to try to get a public ownership of that property. It's a fabulous piece of property. But that's what environmental justice in our mind is about starting to listen more to the community, hear what the needs are, and work there. Our goal in the next 5 years is to have 40% of our on-the-ground projects, many of which we've been talking about, to be taking place in overburdened communities and to be doing more partnership and empowerment. By the way, it's Groundworks Bridgeport I was talking about with is Christina's group. And, you know, a 5-year goal is to see if Christina is really interested in trying to develop the capacity with her group down in Bridgeport to run the kind of projects that we have started doing with other groups in, you know, training up young people, which she works with in Bridgeport to do that kind of work. So that's a major transformative vision that's frankly pretty new to us. We have been there with our lawyers for the past 30 years, responsive to requests to come in New Haven or, you know, up in Hartford to battle bad things, but to actually sit and listen more deeply and empower and train and find out how we can be helpful. That's a newer activity on our part, and one that I think all of us have to do a better job. So, any questions about that? Last slide on transformation, which is really transforming our landscape, getting our landscape to act more like a forest. You know, we have the most urbanized estuary watershed in the country. When you think about New York City, all of the developed communities along Long Island Sound and up the 91 corridor, it's quite incredible. So we need to do that on a human scale. We did 138 rain gardens. We need to train up our partners to build 500 in the next 5 years. The neighborhood scale, which is the center, is sort of this vision of our communities to act more like a forest. You've all walked in the woods in the rain. You know how that rain just trickles into that forest, soft forest stuff, and is absorbed, as opposed to rushing off, causing flooding. We have a regulation that our senior attorney spent 6 months of his life negotiating. The important part of that is that 3 out of 4 towns in 2 years are going to have to identify each year 1% of their pavement and get it so that the water flowing off of that pavement, 1%, is absorbed by a rain garden or a bioswale or permeable pavement and absorbed back down into the ground. You know, over a 20-year period, we can literally transform our landscape so it is so our rivers are again swimmable and fishable, and so that you know, we're preventing increasing flooding from climate change as well. You know, it's going to be a real challenge because what we know and what I've observed about the way we work in Connecticut, you know, we're the state of steady habits. Getting a new habit established of doing this kind of work is something that's going to require a tremendous amount of work. And then finally, in the bottom, landscape scale. This is an example of a project we completed two summers ago, actually just last summer, out in New York. So this is a 18-acre parking lot in one of the most loved parks on Long Island, Sunken Meadow State Park. Before we got started with parks on this project, this was 18 acres of asphalt that drained into the little river system, the Sunken Meadow Brook on the left. All of that pollution running in there. Now you can see, and I'll use my thing, there's some, if I can find it, there's 3 areas here, 4 areas over here capturing water. This water that runs down is captured by this artificial wetland system, which treats it. There are plantings along here where water is captured as well as here. And again, anything that escapes comes down into this new artificial wetland system, which all pre-treats the water before it runs out. We plan on doing about another 4 or 5 of these projects around Long Island Sound over the next 5 years. So it's the only way that we're going to manage our water and improve water quality in the face of climate change. So I think that's it for these series of slides. Any last questions? Probably got a couple minutes left is all.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody who has questions can type them in or raise your hand. One
I'm
thing,
just, okay, go ahead. Yeah,
well,
go
one
ahead.
thing I was wondering about was with all of this push towards electrification,
Yep,
both for cars, for heating and cooling homes, etc.
yep.
What are
Hopefully.
the options? There are some options such as solar and wind, but those are sort of small. And it seems as if we're going to have to depend more on generation of electricity. So if
Yep.
you were
Yep.
if you were king, not that you're not, but if you were like really the king, um, would you prefer to have a new or expanded gas-fired electricity generation or a nuclear generation?
Well, I'll talk about nuclear for a moment. I do think it would be wise for us to be really examining whether we can at least maintain in a safe way, and if we have to repower, think about a possible expansion of our current nuclear facility. But wind is a huge, huge, huge potential in our area. I mean, I have solar on my roof. I run my electric car with it. It's all great, but it's so much more local than the potential of offshore wind. We have already in Connecticut future procured enough wind power to power 130,000 homes, with much more of it on the way. This is an enormous potential. Now, storage of that wind power, of that electricity, is another issue which we're going to have to grapple with. But you're seeing both the cost of wind power and the cost of storage coming down dramatically. So my prediction is over the next 20 years or so, 15 years, you're already seeing major, major offshore leases. Bill Lucy is working very actively at trying to make sure that the way in which these are constructed and built is going to have the least impact, particularly on whale populations from a seismic point of view. There are other issues out there. There's no such thing as a free lunch. There will be some impact. However, what you're also starting to see with the first wind power system that was put off of Massachusetts, it's already installed or in installation, is that these raised structures are starting to attract more fish in an area that it wouldn't have otherwise. So it is going to change the ecology. It's not going to all be bad. There may be some increasing richness. So the argument is that little electric cars like I did, super cheap by the way, a few years ago. The kind of heating that you're referring to, which is super efficient heat pump in the center. You've seen them around, or electric mower. There's really no excuse not to do that. I do strongly believe we're going to have to maintain some nuclear. And, again, if it comes to repowering our millstone, it would be nice if we could increase that capacity in another 20 or 30 years. But we're going to need to be working on storage and wind power. We're already talking about how to design the cables coming in from the race to send the power our way. We need to do it intelligently instead of having, 5 or 6 or 10 cables willy-nilly. Let's do it in a single corridor. Let's try to have one large capacity cable that's going to have the least impact, those kind of things. But personal scale electrifying, I think, does have, and of course, the obvious thing that I think most of you know is that conserving and creating more energy efficiency within our homes is the most environmentally beneficial way of using electricity. But if you're going to move forward, then electrification is a great one. Last thing I'm just going to add is collective action is totally essential. So I would really encourage all of you to join or support a civic organization working on that. Ask them about their track record over the last few years. And something I didn't put down here, which I think is extremely important, also ask them, what are they doing about partnering with, community organizations and first in need communities? Are they working on that at least? Is it something they're considering? Because if we don't establish a more equitable, state and equitable world as we're fighting environmental action, we're not going to get anywhere. So anyway, we're a bargain, $25 a year. You can sign up at savethesound.org. Really lots of hands-on opportunities. Look in our calendar for those opportunities. We are going to have by the way, a planting, a really exciting project where we're collecting stormwater from a 4-city block area in New Haven, bringing it down to a pocket park along the Mill River, right next to the Fairhaven Martinez School, where the kids are involved with us. It's a fantastic project. We're going to be doing that right around the beginning of May, so look at our website for that. So it was a pleasure being here today. Really appreciate it. And Dan, thank you for everything you're doing. I just would everybody give Dan a little round of applause here for, his leadership in bringing,
And I know I'm going to sign up for Save the Sound, and we'll hopefully we've recruited a couple of new members for you.
well, really appreciate it.
So you'll send us some of your resources, and when we
Yes.
get the YouTube link, then we'll send it out to our 500 plus Branford Forum mailing list.
And Dan, if you could do me a big favor, if there were any questions that didn't get asked, or you could, I was not taking notes during this because I can't do that. I can't talk and take notes at the same time. I know many of you smarter people can do that, but if you wouldn't mind reminding me of some of the things I promised I'd get out, that would be very helpful as well.
Okay, will do. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Curt. It was a real pleasure and very informative and very entertaining. So everybody go outside and enjoy the beautiful weather.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Hello.